The pendulum of F1 is swinging back. Just how long will that last for? Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risks all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of F1 in Review, the episode and the hour where we look back at round 11 of this season, the Austrian Grand Prix. Hello, I'm a somewhat hoarse Tom Claiborne, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher. A reminder, you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as F1 in Review. We do have our own account there as well, where we put up the episodes after they have been published, be that live on River Radio or via your preferred podcast provider. You know all of them. So moving forwards now, we start at the very top of the grid of how it finished. Ferrari. This race saw, indeed on Friday and Saturday, the Red Bull and Max Verstappen qualify in P1 and indeed win the sprint that came later, but it was the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc who was turning back the clock in many ways, and he had the last laugh. He won this race, and it means now the Red Bull's seemingly unstoppable run of 6 wins on the spin is now firmly over, and Ferrari are building themselves a 2-win on the bounce streak so far, 1 for each driver. And when we look at this race compared to, let's say, Bahrain and Australia for Ferrari, it's quite similar. They look, in terms of pace alone, somewhat unbeatable, and really Red Bull, or the one Red Bull driver remaining for the 99.9% of this race, didn't really have an answer regardless of the strategy they went for, be it undercuts or whatever. And in my view, at least, we saw a somewhat more confident Ferrari compared to Silverstone. There was little sort of dither and delay and discussion and all this about what they should do. It seemed that very much they could do any strategy, pit whenever, do what they want and win the day. What do we make though, guys, of the Ferrari comeback, should we say, perhaps a newfound momentum, at least when it comes to power circuits?
Very interesting, isn't it? Because last week we did pose that question, whether or not Ferrari was going to be able to catch up with Red Bull, given that there was, I think at the time there was about 60 points between each of the top three, so 60 points between Red Bull to Ferrari and then 60 points between Ferrari and Mercedes. And to some extent this weekend the balance of Formula 1 decided to hurt poor Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez. Perez, as you say, Tom, wasn't there for 99% of the race, which is a real shame, because on the opening lap he collided with George Russell. George Russell ended up getting a 5-second penalty for that. And unfortunately, that collision took a massive chunk out of Perez's side, and so he lost so much aerodynamics that they couldn't really remain competitive, so they retired him. And then later on, the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz decided it didn't really fancy overtaking Max Verstappen, and so it decided to end the race in a dramatic style, catching itself on fire in a horrendous way. And I was screaming at the TV, saying, "Come on, Sainz, get out of the car," because he was rolling down a hill trying to get out of this car that was on fire. So his engine went in a catastrophic way, took the whole engine out. I don't know how Ferrari are going to work out what went wrong, because it didn't just go bang, it sort of went bang and then destroyed all the evidence after it. So, as I say, the Formula 1 is cruel sometimes, and just when you think you've got one up on your competitors because they're having a bad race, the hand of fate intervenes. So I think Ferrari this weekend were on it in the race, but certainly I don't know what was going on in the sprint and in the qualifying, because they just looked like they had an inferior car to Red Bull. Going into this race, Red Bull had said that they had a turbocharger that would be very good at the altitude, and they had really optimized the car. And in the qualifying, Max was pretty, was pretty good. And then in the sprint, he just dominated. In that sprint qualifying. We're not allowed to call it a race, apparently, but, in the sprint qualifying on the Saturday, he just sauntered off. We just didn't see him one iota. And so I was expecting it to be exactly the same in the race, but it just wasn't. The Ferrari of Leclerc was just fantastic, and then the Ferrari of Sainz was almost fantastic until it decided it didn't fancy it anymore. So I don't know what changed. And in the interviews before the race on Sunday, Leclerc said, "Oh yeah, we're going to have the measure of them on Sunday," and he was completely right. So if any of you know why Leclerc knew that he was going to be so dominant on Sunday, please do let me know. But I feel like Ferrari almost shot themselves in the foot again, because near the end of the race, Charles Leclerc had this throttle issue where it'd stick at low speeds, which means he couldn't get off the throttle properly, and so he had to hit the brakes earlier, and it lost him time. He only won the race by 1.9 seconds. So it makes me wonder whether or not Ferrari were just a bit lucky this weekend. What do you think? Is it just luck, or is it actually that Ferrari should have been totally dominant, and that's the way it's going to be going forward?
I feel like I'm about to break new ground here and actually credit Ferrari for their strategy for the first time in a very long time. Hang on. Because the thing is, they actually had a pace advantage this weekend. It's interesting you say, Tristan, about the interviews he gave. I think it was the team radio as well after the sprint on the Saturday, where he just flat out says, "It's fine, we'll get them tomorrow," and that is reflective of a fact that there was more of a pace advantage for them this weekend. That was clear in the race. It wasn't like Silverstone, where Max Verstappen had a problem, and without a problem he likely would have won that race. So from going from one of Ferrari's back-to-back victories being more based on luck, this one was based on actually keeping their heads, and the strategy ended up working out well. When Red Bull threw the dice, bringing in Verstappen at a different time, they stuck to their guns. They didn't follow another team's lead, which I thought was really, really positive from their side. It just came across, as like less muddled thinking, which often is what the Ferrari strategy comes across as. But yeah, poor Carlos Sainz, honestly, poor guy. I feel like he's had 4 retirements now this season out of 11 races. So if you're retiring from 35% of the races in a season, you're not really going to have any realistic chance of a championship challenge, nor is it going to help your team's prospects in the Constructors' Championship. So for there's the phrase, every cloud has a silver lining. For Ferrari on this weekend, every silver lining has a cloud, unfortunately, because whilst the victories come their way, and I thought Leclerc drove his backside off. I think, to be honest, the last few races he's been really doing it really well. Canada coming from the back of the grid to where he did, coming in 5th. In Silverstone, managing to hold off. I know he was holding off Alonso and Norris at the end, but holding off the other cars as long as he did, whilst he was on hards and they were on softs, I thought it was a phenomenal effort. And then this weekend he was just on it, and again, reliability almost struck. It would have been the most cruel thing in the world had he had a throttle failure and he'd managed to not win that race. That would have been a massive injustice for him, but also big questions would have been asked of Ferrari and their reliability. But he came through, he won the race, he had a pace advantage, and it'd be interesting now to see where we go from here in terms of whether this is, as you described it at the top, Tom, whether it's a pendulum swing in their favour, whether I wouldn't say it's going to be a flash in the pan, but Ferrari here have got, 1, the momentum seemingly going their way a bit, and 2, they've got, before the summer break, 2 back-to-back races in France and Hungary where they can really consolidate their current advantage and they can make up some ground in both the Constructors and the Drivers' Championships. It'd be interesting to see if that'll be the case. But whilst Silverstone felt like, they got a bit lucky, got the race win, and also almost lost themselves the race win, this weekend felt like they actually worked it well and managed to take advantage of their pace advantage. So if they have more weekends like this one, the pendulum could be swinging, possibly back in their direction.
I think the best way I've heard it be described is that Ferrari are building momentum, but it's very fragile momentum. We had one car doing really well getting P1, the other one suffering from the famous old mechanical issues they've had. 4 times now a Ferrari car's DNF'd, and we're only in, round 11 as I was saying, so it's not a really great conversion rate. But we saw, didn't we, on the upside, this was quite similar in my view to how they operated in round 1 in Bahrain, because not only were they very punchy, racy, and looked very good in terms of pace, but as you say, the strategy was bang on. There wasn't any sort of muddled dithering. It was very much, this is what we're going to do, we trust ourselves to execute it, and doing just that. I think if we look at the overtake on lap 12, where he dives down the inside of Verstappen, who looks, unaware really of Leclerc going for it and thinking, well, he's not going to go and make a move there. It shows the confidence, I feel, that Leclerc can have and does have when it comes to this Ferrari at power circuits. So if we're looking at the calendar now, we're going to Paul Ricard next. I can imagine there's going to be another rather good weekend in some capacity for Ferrari, or there should be, because they're the tech for that. After the summer break as well, we've got Spa, where I think they could also do some damage. But the question begs as well, are they only going to be a constructor where they can do very well at power circuits and muddle through and perhaps get a P1 or a P2 or on the podium here or there in the other circuits, or are they more well-rounded? Because if we're looking at them versus Red Bull, for example, as was seen by Red Bull winning 6 races, they can seemingly do it anywhere on their day. So it's up to Ferrari now to show that consistency instead of just being an operator which does very well in a certain type of environment, really. But definite green shoots, I think, for Ferrari, for Leclerc. But we've seen it before, haven't we? They started the season so well. I drank the Kool-Aid, but the issues remain. I think, really, this weekend surmised where they are. They've got great potential, but there's still the Achilles heel they need to get to the bottom of. Because compare them to Red Bull, for example. Yes, you had one driver finish, but the other one was only out owing to a collision, not a technical issue or a mechanical one. They seem to be at the races at a variety of circuits when both drivers are still on the track, and I think Ferrari need to go and match them pound for pound. So interesting to see what will happen next weekend.
Yeah, it is, because I agree that I feel like Ferrari on paper this year should be dominating. Really, they should. They stormed out the gates. They demonstrated early on that they had a power unit that was ridiculously fast, and that's part of the reason why other Ferrari teams have been doing well. They've got the design ethos absolutely spot on, which is why other teams are looking at the way they're doing things, and they've also been able to exploit loopholes that even Mercedes haven't thought of. At the moment, there's this controversy around these flexible floors, which we won't really have time to get into in this podcast, but it just gives them a bit of an advantage because their floors in 2 pieces. Mercedes didn't think of exploiting that, so Ferrari have really come out of the gates this year presenting this incredible golden chalice of a race car, and then they just lacked this consistency, and that's what's really letting them down. So when you look at the raw numbers between Ferrari and Red Bull at this point, there's only 56 points, and between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, there is now only 38 points. And given that we're about to go sort of halfway through the season, and we're only a race away from the summer or so from the summer break, then we would say, oh yes, there's all to play for, and Ferrari can catch up, and look how fast they are. But it seems to me like Ferrari's problem is actually they are competitive. In my opinion, Bonotto, their team principal, is wrong. This is the season where they are competitive. But what they're not is consistence. And consistency is absolutely key in Formula One. We've always said that. And you're right, without Perez's unfortunate collision, then I think Ferrari wouldn't have done nearly as well. Because Red Bull were already a lap down and a man down. So, it gave them the opportunity to really to take that lead, and then given that Sainz's car gave up, then they were lucky because, well, if Perez had stayed in the race, it would have been Ferrari on the back foot in terms of the constructors, even if Leclerc could win. And so I feel like that's the bit that they've got to work on at the moment, that consistency of their package, because this was the year that they were supposed to win. At the beginning, we were all saying, yep, Ferrari's finally, look at Ferrari go. Not only are, Red Bull struggling and inconsistent, but look at Ferrari, they're fantastic. And And what we're seeing that typical Ferrari slip. So I don't know whether or not it's just because Ferrari hold on to their legacy team, and they really do hold on to their team once they're in there. The team principal, Matteo Binotto, was an engineer. He worked his way up. He finally got to the top. I feel like Ferrari, involve themselves in a select group of individuals, keep them in there, and then clutch onto them to the very end. And of course, if that doesn't work from the beginning, it's not going to work later on. The strategy team, for example, they're indecisive at best. Damn right, not paying attention at worst. The engines in the Ferrari are fantastically fast, but also decide to catch fire and explode. Throttle's not working. I think the only people that currently are on it, absolutely on it at the moment, are the aero team. The aero package is amazing, fantastic. Yep. So whoever, keep them, but everyone else, maybe they just need to do like a little reshuffle, just re-deal the cards and mix everyone up a bit, see what happens. I don't know. But I think if Ferrari can keep the consistency and get that spot on after the summer break, then I do think that we will have a fantastic championship at the end. I reckon Ferrari could absolutely bring the fight back to Red Bull. But at the moment, I just don't think they've got a chance, because it's taken them basically another quarter of the season to get back into a race-winning position.
And when you say bring the fight back there, Tristan, do you mean in the constructors or the drivers? Do you think they've got a better chance in one, or...?
I think they've got a better chance in the drivers, absolutely, because the problem for Ferrari is that they have to get strategy right twice in one race when it comes to the constructors. They have to get the engines right twice. I think at the moment, and I'm really sad to say it, but I think they've got to prioritise trying to get Leclerc a championship, because I think if they go into the next few races allowing Leclerc to have the say and have the dominance, then I think that will set Ferrari up better than what they're doing now, which is saying, oh yeah, we'll let them fight. Yeah, go on, Sainz. Go on, have a go at him. Because in the sprint race on Saturday, they let them fight, which allowed Verstappen to just saunter off. Well, that's really good for fans, but I'm talking from a not a fan's perspective here. It's rubbish for Ferrari to allow Ferrari to ruin Ferrari's own race. Leclerc and Sainz fighting for P2 can only help Red Bull, and Red Bull knows this. They're sitting there thinking, thank you very much. Look at that. Max Verstappen cruises back home to a P1 for Sunday. Great, nothing can go wrong now. And of course, Leclerc then had to make up for all of that on Sunday, which I'm glad he could do. But to be honest, that's pushing everything to the limits. And it's when you start pushing everything to the limit, that's when you get the problem. Would Ferrari have had the same problem for Leclerc if he hadn't have needed to have to keep fighting back for Verstappen and to try and overtake him and push harder and harder and harder? Because it's only when you go over the edge that and to the very extremes that you get the problems. That's why Mercedes was so dominant for so many years, because effectively they could cruise. So yeah, I think that given there's only 38 points between Leclerc and Verstappen, Leclerc only needs to beat him sort of 5 times. And there's an awful lot of races left. So I think they can use Leclerc to get into the lead. I think they can use... Sainz needs to be sort of the wingman to Leclerc at this point. He's too far back. Now, that's it. He's too far back. He's got 75 points to the first place. And that, for me, at this point, that's a cut-off point. That he would need... Sainz would need to win nearly every race from now on.
Yeah.
To put that into perspective.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those, isn't it, where you think what could have been without those retirements? Because when you consider that we say, Ferrari are hampered by reliability issues when it comes to the mechanical car, the setup, and all that sort of stuff, double the DNS and retirements Sainz has versus Leclerc, really. So it's not like they can turn around and Team Sainz can go, well, I'm sorry, this isn't fair, you're prioritising Leclerc over Sainz because he's been given a bigger contract and because he's the golden boy and this, that and the other. As you say, as Red Bull have done in many years gone by, Mercedes have been doing as well. It's one of those where pragmatism and the reality of the situation has to go and win out the day, and it's one of those where Sainz could have had the possibility of fighting for this championship if we rewind to the perspective of, let's say, round 3 or 4 or maybe even 5. That's even after 2 retirements. But now, as you say, the gap is so huge, the gulf is there, and it needs to be one of those situations where they focus on trying to win, not just being competitive. And I'm interested to see from Binotto's perspective how much of his words about this season being one where we're competitive again is a mentality or one where it's just playing down expectations after being hampered so much by the package that they have and by the power units. Because I hope really it isn't a core mentality problem or a mantra that they have, because if they're already conceding defeat, despite now building up 2 back-to-back wins, having the greatest car on paper, definitely one which is firmly suited to power circuits, you sort of think, well, will Ferrari ever be a team that's going to seriously compete or even win the drivers or the constructors if they're conceding defeat after 6 retirements? When you have, let's say, compare that to Red Bull, for example, you got the first 2 retirements in Bahrain, round 1, and then Australia as well, and that was 3 in 3 races. Alarm bells are ringing, but we hardly speak now, do we, about reliability when it comes to Red Bull, because they've turned it round. So I think it shows almost Ferrari are out of practice, for one of a better phrase, really, in terms of fighting for the championship, be that drivers or constructors. They've always been happy to be the nearly team. I remember sort of 2018, 2019 of, we may challenge Mercedes, we may, but they never really kicked on from what was a really good testing period before. But now there aren't really any excuses. As we'll see now, back-to-back wins, they have the technology there. If they can just get rid of the reliability problems, you've got someone with Charles Leclerc, who I think previously on this podcast and elsewhere, there's always been a question of, is Leclerc in the same bracket to Verstappen? Is Verstappen, let's say, a generational talent? If we're talking about the great drivers of generations and those that go on and kick on to get multiple world championships in their name, and is Leclerc, the nearly man to that? Is he box office versus, let's say, the level of Lewis Hamilton and Schumacher and co. But I think really he's up there with Verstappen. We saw that this race. We saw it last in a different context. But now it's got to be, talking about theory and all that, making that into practice, because it's all well and good saying, Leclerc is being held back by the team. But with Ferrari being such a huge brand, A and B, so much money as well, and I understand there's a budget cap when it comes to development of the car, but the pull of the name of Ferrari and the money they can attract purely by wages, which is not restricted by the cap, is huge compared to someone like, to an extent, Red Bull, maybe even Mercedes as well, because they're Ferrari are the grand old team of the sport and Mercedes are only getting into it. So less excuses really, because we're seeing now what Ferrari can do, but will they continue to do it? If we're looking back at my prior comments and how they've transpired, I'm not overly confident, but I'd love to be proved wrong.
It does come back to the original point about the pendulum, and the pendulum's now swinging with them, and it's an interesting point as well that's made about science, because 75 points on anyone to make up on anyone is hard enough, but 75 points to make up on Max Verstappen, I'd say is nigh on impossible. So it would take a lot of luck for him to get back in the picture. I think Leclerc's in a more profitable position where 1 retirement for Max and Charles is back in it, I think. Think last season where Hamilton was about 33 points behind Verstappen going into Silverstone. Then that infamous collision happened, and for all the rights and the wrongs of that, and there's a whole debate about that, Hamilton won the race, and all of a sudden the gap went from 33 points to 8 points. So for Leclerc, if he wins a race and Max retires, that gap goes from 38 to 13. So arguably now, Ferrari have to put their eggs in the Charles Leclerc basket. They have to do something which, back in the Charles Leclerc basket, weird phrase that. They have to do something which they have to do something which back in the day, in the ruthless Schumacher years, they'd be all too happy to go to Mr. Rubens Barrichello and say, "You're going to be number 2, mate. You're going to have to help out the team and get Schumacher this championship as early as possible." Now, it's not that scenario because they're coming from behind to try and win, but Mr. Binotto needs to ditch his nice side and just be firm with this. I feel like Christian Horner would, if there was a scenario where, as much as he may profess in public that they have an equal chance, if there was a scenario where Verstappen was, say, 75 points ahead of Perez with a handful of races, he would say, sorry Checo, but we're going to prioritise Max for the championship as long as we're still in a strong position to get the constructors. Ferrari find themselves in a position to possibly still get the constructors, so you could argue that with the gap there is between Leclerc and Sainz, in terms of as well their proximity to Verstappen, Mr. Binotto is going to have to get his nasty side out. Maybe the nasty side that he with his finger wagging that he was giving to Leclerc after Silverstone, telling him to stop being upset. He needs to maybe do the same thing to Carlos Sainz and stamp some authority down and basically say, if we want to win both championships, we're going to have to, one, still try for the best result for the team, but two, give one driver a greater shot at the championship. So it'd be interesting to see if, to be honest, to summarise it, see if Ferrari take advantage of this momentum swing, because there have been times this season where they haven't been able to do that.
My fear, though, is they're not going to be able to, because the implications of some of the things that we saw across the season so far, the inconsistencies and the damage caused to the engines, for example, mean that has a knock-on effect to the rest of the season. So Carlos Sainz, for example, is definitely going to have to take an engine penalty. There's no engine left. If you didn't see the engine ripping itself apart, it did with so much force that the side pods of the Ferrari bulged out and exploded off. That's a catastrophic rapid disassembly. It's absolutely ridiculous, the amount of force, and then that's why we'll sort of caught fire. So that means that Carlos Sainz at some point is definitely going to have to take an engine penalty. Maybe next race, maybe they'll decide to do it later on. I'm not sure when they'll do it yet, but that's definitely going to happen. Charles Leclerc has gone through enough engines that he's now going to have to take an engine penalty later on in the season, and I can confidently say, I think at this point, that Max Verstappen will have a retirement or a pointsless race for the rest of the season at some point. It always happens. It's, at the end of the day, that's last season, for example. That's why Lewis Hamilton was able to catch back up. But if you said, well, how many pointless races are Red Bull and Ferrari going to have? Well, I'd say, Max Verstappen's probably going to have one or, maybe two. Oh, Leclerc, I could see him having 3, 4, at this point, because they've just not been on it at the moment. They haven't got that super competitive consistency. And so I think absolutely, yes, Leclerc could definitely catch up quite quickly as Lewis Hamilton did last season, because Red Bull might have a retirement or something might go wrong that they only get a couple of points. But the problem is Ferrari in themselves have set themselves up for a very difficult season ahead due to the fact that they've got these penalties incoming. They've got these other problems that their strategy, for example, just can't hold it together all the time. And also, the sprint races, or rather I should say sprints, because we're not allowed to call them races. Those sprints do offer points, good points, and different points between first place and second place. So it's annoying that Ferrari are like, we won't necessarily go for the win tomorrow. Why not? Because a win for Red Bull over Ferrari just extends the lead for Red Bull. And you might say, well, at 1 point, 2 points doesn't really matter. Well, it did last season, so it could this season. You've got to get every single point you possibly can. So I don't know. I think Ferrari have got a difficult season ahead of them. The pendulum might well have swung in Ferrari's favour now. They might well be quicker. But when it comes down to it, it might just be too little too late.
And on that point, if you're Ferrari and you've got to go and take the penalties because of the new engines you'll have to be putting in, when do you go and take those penalties? Do you take them at the power circuits where we've seen, this race gone by and also towards the start of the season where they're so good and they can do very much what Mercedes did last year and you start from the back of the grid but then power their way through and get a respectable points tally in the end, albeit, perhaps on the podium but P2, P3 or at worst case P4? Or do you accept defeat in, let's say, the more more street circuit ones where there's less opportunity to take. I'm thinking Hungary, for example, being a good example of that, and go, well, realistically, we know that Red Bull have probably got the win over us in this case, so we'll just, accept defeat, but then bank on us doing really well in, let's say, Spa or Monza, for example.
I would take it 100%. I would take it when you know you can overtake. Something like United States would spring to mind. It's quite good at the Circuit of Americas to overtake there. So, later on in the season, once you've got a bit of a better understanding of where your competitors are and things like that. But to be honest, with Ferrari, they might have to take one much sooner than they want to be able to. But that's where I do it. Definitely one of those tracks where you can overtake, like Circuit of Americas.
In terms of the best place to take the engine penalty, ones that stand out, Spa, because of the long straights and the ability to overtake.
Yep.
Would they dare take an engine penalty at Monza, Ferrari? I mean,
politically that's dangerous.
You might have to. If they can save it for later on in the season, I'd say I agree with Austin in America, or maybe Sao Paulo. I think Interlagos is good for it, but for me, it looks like it's going to be sooner rather than later. So Spa or Monza, in my opinion.
And we've spoken about the Ferrari Works team, and the Ferrari Power teams had an excellent weekend as well. By extension, we return to Haas now, and look how well they've done, particularly Mick Schumacher, P6 for him, a double points finish, again Magnussen in P8. And we're seeing now, aren't we, that Haas can be very punchy, be very racy. They're now 7th in the Constructors' Championship, and throughout this race they were fighting and holding their own with a Mercedes team that has improved. It was one of those previously where we thought, well, do Haas have the ability to go up against a depleted, porpoising Mercedes Constructors team? But now, after the upgrades that have seen Mercedes finish P3 and P4, you've got a Haas car there, which has the ability, both drivers now, not just Kevin Magnussen doing all the spade work there, having the ability to go toe-to-toe with them. We spoke about the pendulum so much, and when Ferrari do well, you'd be surprised if the Ferrari Power teams didn't do respectively well or relatively well when it comes to what they can achieve. But what do we think then? A bit of momentum coming around for Haas, particularly for Mick Schumacher. The questions are being answered by him seemingly now. He's gone in a very good patch of form by scoring good points not only in the race in Silverstone but also now the Austrian Grand Prix. Is this a turning point for Haas or just another pendulum swing?
Yeah, what's got into Mick Schumacher? He's all right all of a sudden. But no, that makes it sound like I thought he was dreadful. No, it's not that. I just think that he wasn't living up to expectations. He has and I think I've mentioned this before in an episode, whenever, maybe last year at some point. He has a very specific pattern in his junior Formula career of easing in year one, kind of doing all right, maybe getting the odd race win here or there, but not setting the world alight. But then year two, he knows the car, he has the routines, and I think in like all the three junior categories he was in, he won or came second in year two, having come around 8th, 9th, 10th in year one. So the expectation, you would say, from a lot of people would be for year two of Formula One to be better than what was actually a good year one overall. Yes, he was up against a very low yardstick in Nikita Mazepin in a car which had not much chance of fighting for points or being on a par with the rest of the field. But Haas's decision to, in the end, prioritise completely development for the 2022 car meant that there was more pressure on Schumacher, because you were like, well, the car's going to be better. You saw in the opening rounds in Bahrain, Magnussen came 5th, qualified it in like 6th or 7th or something, and you were like, right, Haas is like got the potential to be the 4th best team here, so Schumacher has to score points eventually. And it's just the fact it took him a lot longer than we expected, and he's had those incidents like in Miami where he's crashed into his Formula One dad, Sebastian Vettel, with a couple of laps left, and like messed up a great chance there. His various crashes, not being able to race in Saudi Arabia because he destroyed the car so much in qualifying, splitting the car in half when he crashed in Monaco, having good positions in races and basically or being like in a stronger position and not necessarily taking advantage of it. And he got that monkey off his back at Silverstone. He got those points. He drove a very, very good race. He managed to have a battle with Max Verstappen at the end. He was like quite measured about it. A lot of drivers in that situation would have got to 8th place, having never scored points before, and gone, right, there's a world champion in front of me in a car which is usually faster, I'm going to back out of this. I'm just going to leave it. But he tried to go for 7th place within reason. He wasn't overly aggressive. Max arguably was in that, but he went for 7th place and wanted the even more points, which I thought was really good to see. And then again here in Austria, he's just been solid. He's been solid really. He's taken advantage of the fact that there seems to have been an uptick in the Ferrari-powered teams for some reason or another, with Ferrari themselves having a really strong weekend. Haas got 6th and 7th in qualifying, which is really strong. Mitigating factor of Lewis Hamilton crashing out and Sergio Perez having time track limits penalties. So it would, if you take that out, it would have been 8th and 9th. But still, only 5 cars got, or 5 teams got a car into Q3 this weekend, and Haas was one of them. They both maintained strong position in the sprint race, and then took advantage of what was in front of them. When cars dropped out, they just stayed solid on Sunday. Mick Schumacher reaching the dizzy heights, you could say, of 6th place, but not seeming too overawed by it, or not sort of, not really sort of. I think sometimes with Formula One, with many things in life, you do end up doing a good job when people don't notice that you're doing a good job, if you know what I mean. So if you end up doing something well, and then everyone at the end goes, "Oh wow, that was great from X or Y," and that's basically what Mick Schumacher's done. I think he sort of had a decent race, and at the end we're like, "Oh, he's in 6th place. He's done really well." Whilst if he had been talked about, it probably would have been something which would have prevented him from getting that 6th place. So it's almost like there's been a breakthrough or something, like a breakthrough with the pace, breakthrough with maybe just the psychological breakthrough of getting those first points. But I think his strong performance reflects what in general has been a stronger showing by Haas. They've now got, just over the last 2 races, they got both cars in the points. So they got 14 points out of Austria, which is a healthy total for a team that has only 34 all season. So after 5 races without any car in the points at all, they're on a good run of form at the moment. They've gone past Aston Martin and AlphaTauri in the constructors. Alfa Romeo look a bit more in their sights, and they're on an upward curve. And again, talk all the time in the world about pendulums and momentum. Maybe they're on one of those at the moment where they've got to take advantage of their momentum swing and take advantage of what could possibly be an uptick in form from them. But I thought, credit as well to Mick Schumacher for upping his game, doing really well, especially this weekend. Like I said, he had a solid all-round weekend, as did Kevin Magnussen. So at the moment, it looks like the only way is up for Haas, possibly.
It is. It's always very difficult when we sit there, discussing how a potential driver isn't necessarily holding their own in a team, because in the back of our minds we know we'll eventually be proved wrong, and everyone goes, I can't believe you said that about Mick. Look at him now as he sails his way up the order. Well, and at the end of the day, we can only go by what we're seeing, and it seems like Mick's doing all right now. Now that he's, I suppose, steadied the ship, he can start fighting with world championships. That battle between him and Lewis Hamilton was fantastic. What great racing. Respectful, fun, interesting, good, solid racing. Well done, Mick. No one is more happy to see him proving his place in the sport than me. I'm rooting for him, but at the end of the day, we can't lie about what we see. We can only go by what we review, hence the podcast title. And Kevin Magnussen as well. What a good choice to bring him back into the season. Out of the 11 rounds that we've had so far, including the sprint race as well in this last race, Kevin Magnussen scored points 7 times this season, which is just fantastic for Haas, because last year they were doing not very well. This time, Kevin Magnussen alone scored points 7 times this season, and we've had 11 races, but that skews it a little bit because of the sprint races as well. I think there's about 13 opportunities because we had 2 sprint races to score points. So 7 out of 13, pretty good for Haas, because they haven't been on it every time. They've had some poor strategy decisions. So I'm so pleased that we're seeing Haas just get better and better. They have now reached 7th in the Constructors' Championship. If I said to you that last year, I was like, Haas going to be 7th, would you believe me?
No chance.
No. And
it's not just like they've only just overtaken AlphaTauri either. There is 7 points between them now, which it's starting to open up a gap there, which is fantastic. I'm looking at the fact that Haas have 34 points, and looking at Alfa Romeo on 51, going, ooh, I wonder, where can Haas go next? I think that's their cap, by the way. I don't think they're going to get anywhere after. I reckon if everything went Haas's way, they might be able to get to 6th. But 7th place, if they finish 7th, they will be rock stars. I on Twitter at the moment, every time Haas do really well, Gunther Steiner gets photoshopped next to a bigger and bigger ship, and he's got a big ship at the moment. Imagine if they got like 6th in the season. I don't know what they'd Photoshop him against, but absolutely top form. I'm so pleased. I really am. And as a bonus to them, if they have stuck with their mantra really of we're gonna give up last season and we're gonna come into this season having spent all of the budget on R&D, and it's paying off. And I think they'll be pleased as well by the news that the budget cap is actually going to be increased. Mm-hmm. So it's going to go up by I think it's about 3% because of inflation. So I'm glad to see F1 is considering the fact that there is inflation around the world at the moment, and they want to help the teams a bit, because this will really help Haas, especially because they haven't got a huge amount of money anyway. Haas now needs some solid sponsors. Don't go after the weird lot again, because Haas have had weird sponsors with Rich Energy and the such like. So yeah, we want some solid, good sponsorship under Haas. Really drive them in the right direction. I'm so pleased for them. I really was. I felt like Mick getting driver of the day on Sunday was the redemption arc of Haas. So yes, good for them.
Yeah, if you'd have told me towards the start of the season that Mick Schumacher would get a P6 finish and driver of the day, I'd have gone, that's fairly unlikely. But he's answered the critics' questions in this race and the one before. And looking back at it now, knowing that he can go on good runs and finish as high as P6 and challenge, the top races in an inferior car, I'm starting to see some parallels, some similarities between him and George Russell when he was at Williams. Because if we rewind a year or so, it was very much a question of, well, will George Russell be able to do it? Yes, he's in a far inferior car than this Haas car that Mick Schumacher's in, but it'd always be near the points, close to the points, nearly getting that first point to his name. And then when he did it, the floodgates opened. Yes, there was a dip in form, but in terms of patches, in terms of what he was able to produce back to back, he got some solid points in memory. And Mick's doing similar as well, leading the way now compared to his teammate. We heard him on the team radio saying, "I'm faster. Give me the chance, and I can go forward and go as high as P6 and beyond," which he's done. So it seems to be a renewed confidence in Mick, really. It was one of those where before he seemed a bit nervous. It was very much, that was my corner when he bashed into Seb Vettel and, wasn't too assertive about that. But now we're seeing a driver who's letting his racecraft, his ability on the track, do the talking. And when he needs to go and say, listen, I back myself, I know I can do this, he's not afraid to go and have those conversations, which, after the poor start to the season and the question marks that remained over him, it's nice to see he's got that sort of fire in his belly and that the team respect him and go, well, go on then, Mick, you've got points in the last race, we believe you can do it. It's so good to see, and it's nice to see that the patience and the goodwill from Gunther Steiner and Haas and Co and everyone there has paid off for Mick Schumacher, because it wasn't too long ago where, as we said in this very podcast, if they were to dump Mick Schumacher for Antonio Giovinazzi, which was a rumour, which seemed plausible, you'd have gone, well, it's not, on paper at least, an awful decision when you consider that Mick hasn't delivered. But now he's done it twice. I feel he'll go on to get more points. I won't be silly and say he's going to get points for every single race now. But I believe he can now kick on. It's so good to see, because we all know my thoughts on Giovinazzi, but for someone like Mick Schumacher to be dumped because he's not been able to get points, and to have someone like Giovinazzi come back into the sport, who I think has had enough time to prove his worth, put it that way, would be a backward step. But I think really Haas can go into the next few races, as can Ferrari really, to those power circuits now with renewed confidence. I suppose the only issue for them is they're competing with 6th place, which is, in their sights, as we say, with another Ferrari powered car, and I'd argue probably with a better driver against them, Valtteri Bottas, than what they have at their disposal. But as we say, when it comes to constructors, you need 2 drivers and 2 cars to be there at your A game, getting points or thereabouts. And if we're looking currently on form, you would say the trajectory of Haas in terms of, the team, where they're going, is probably a bit more on the up, really, than you say compared to Alfa Romeo. Take away the crash that they had, but no points in Austria, which, surprises me when you see Ferrari doing so well, being so dominant in terms of raw power and pace. Ferrari doing the same as well, so you can't go and say, well, unfortunately Alfa Romeo just didn't have the tools at their disposal, because they did. And we've seen, of course, Bottas getting points in every other race aside from one or two prior to this, and when he's retired, that's been one of the only reasons why he hasn't got it as well. But maybe, as we say, the pendulum is swinging in the favour of one or the other, but it's still going to be a huge task, isn't it, for Haas to go and bridge that gap to Alfa Romeo. And regardless of the back-to-back points they've got, I don't think they should drink the Kool-Aid too much and think that Alpha Tauri are beyond their reach or the gap is too huge, because, well, it can all change. We've seen so far, and we're only 11 rounds in. And now turning our attention to the more negative aspects of this race, Formula One's chiefs have been stepping in and condemning really abhorrent fan behaviour at the Austrian Grand Prix just gone. There's been many sort of accusations of abuse, be that verbal or often sometimes unfortunately physical as well, to members of the crowd and those who are attending this event. We've always seen, haven't we, that there have been certain sways of fans that are opposed to drivers, but when you see booing extending onto something completely different in terms of being abusive to other fans, that's something that's quite different. I don't think we should pretend that this is a new issue in entirety when it comes to Formula One or when it comes to sport more generally, but we're seeing a magnifying glass being shone on it. We're seeing the hierarchy of Formula One deciding to intervene because of the severity of this issue. What do we make of some of the reports we're seeing coming out of this Grand Prix and those that have come before as well?
So I was incredibly disappointed last weekend when it was the British Grand Prix and fans at that Grand Prix were booing Max Verstappen. And I was equally disappointed when at the Austrian Grand Prix, the fans of maybe Max Verstappen or just didn't like Lewis Hamilton or whatever were cheering crashes and things like that. It's really disappointing. It's really disappointing because I know we're better than that. And unfortunately, it went further because that was just the start of a weekend that felt like F1 was letting itself down, because then the allegations came out and the confirmation that fans were abusing women in the stands, saying that they were worthless, saying that they shouldn't support people, making sexual moves against them, and to go to a race and feel scared that you're not going to be able to get through it without someone touching you or insulting you is horrific. It's really horrific. And I'll tell you a story because I haven't told this one on air before. But when we went to the Hockenheim Grand Prix a few years ago, and that will date when this was because there hasn't been a Hockenheim Grand Prix for a few years. My sister was and I were camping and when I was inside the tent, these lads, these big blokes, came up to my sister and started calling in a pretty girl, pretty lady. Come on, one of them said something like, "Oh, come on, pretty lady." And I was inside the tent at the time, and I hear my sister absolutely rip into them. And basically scare them off. Like, I'm trying out of 10, thinking, what the hell on earth is going on? What the hell's this? Anyway, they start, running off. Oh, no, it was only a joke. Anyway, but she luckily, she was, strong enough, I said powerful enough to defend herself. But, she was shaken enough that after that, she would always ask me or my father to chaperone her down to the showers or the loos to make sure that she got there without someone catcalling her or something like that. And I didn't really think of it at the time. But can you imagine that? You're normal being scared of something happening to you because security isn't on point. Absolutely horrific. And yes, some of the teams decided to try and make it up to the girls and things like that by inviting them into the garage. Give them something nice to remember the weekend. But it's not enough. It's not enough. They were let down by the Formula One management. And then, afterwards, they said, oh yeah, we're going to investigate it. They're investigating it at the moment. But don't worry, we'll try and deal with it. They put on the signs, be nice, be respectful to each other. That is not enough. Nowhere near enough. the only way I think that you can fix it is have good security posted around to make sure that these things can be reported very, very quickly. And those people are not tolerated. They're kicked out immediately. Tickets ripped up. Whatever. Bans against them. Whatever we've got to do. Because I am not accepting a culture in Formula One where people think it's acceptable to treat other people, whoever it is, in such a regard that they would be scared to come back to the sport or feel threatened. It was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And it's completely linked to the booing and to the cheering as well. It is unacceptable. And to be honest, I think if we got to ban fans, then that's it. We ban fans. End of.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Tristan, to be fair. Like, it's just... It just beggars belief how people could just come to a stage where they think that's acceptable behaviour. And whether that is... Like, whether it's homophobia, whether it's sexism... The instant of, like you said, a Lewis Hamilton fan basically having her skirt lifted up by male fans, male Max Verstappen fans, who, because she supported someone, didn't think that she was worth the time of day of being treated or respected as a human being. And it just, as someone who works in an industry where I'm constantly trying to indoctrinate the next generation with positive values and, the difference between right and wrong and how to conduct yourselves as a human being, to then see the word I can think of to describe it is absolute louts, just like behave like this. I use that word because Ted Kravitz used that same word to describe Nikita Mazepin when Mazepin had that video. There was that video that came out of Mazepin touching up a woman in the back of a taxi and filming it and putting it on Instagram. And I think that it sums it up. They're just absolute louts for thinking they can behave like that and thinking they can get away with it. And I completely agree with the fact that you need more security, because it seems to be an issue, or at least it has been an issue. It's been an issue sort of under the surface, or under the surface and on the surface for many, many years. And it's something which has been clearly got in the news headlines this weekend and got a very high profile. And yeah, in fact, their tickets need to be ripped up. Bans for life, I think, is fair. Treat it the same way how you have in other sports, like football associations ban fans for life when they've when there's been instances of racism towards players, whether that's in the stands or from the stands, or whether that's on social media after a game. And there needs to be the same attitude. I think also there has to be a debate raised about, for me, again, I can't say 100% sure because I wasn't there. And I also do want to stress, as Toto Wolff stressed in his remarks about the matter, that 99.5% of fans, the vast majority, respectful, behave well, conduct themselves well at the sporting event, and are there to enjoy it, as opposed to the 0.5% who want to put themselves about and try and act big and try and make someone feel miserable. But it's just, there seems to be also perhaps a link between alcohol consumption and the behaviour of the fans. Now, there is a link in humanity and society between alcohol consumption, and you have more to drink, and your boundaries get loosened, your inhibitions start to increase, and your reaction time, both in reacting to incidents but also in deciding what you're going to do with your behaviour, they slow down. And for me, there quite possibly, almost certainly, is a link between alcohol consumption and people thinking this kind of behaviour is acceptable. So again, I think there has to be some sort of debate, possibly. I'm not saying ban alcohol at sporting events, because alcohol at sporting events consumed sensibly by adults means that some people can enjoy themselves more, and it gives a nice atmosphere to the event. But there has to be some sort of debate or something brought in by the FIA, and the FIA and F1 have to show that they are meaning to do something. Show that this "We Race as One" tagline that they shove in our faces all the time. Show us that it matters. Show us that it's not just 4 words on a poster. Show us that it's actually a motto, a value, a thesis that they subscribe to and they actually believe in. I think the reaction from them has to be really, really strong after this. Has to be really, really strong and firm to know that it just won't be tolerated, because it's just more than anything, it's depressing to speak about it. It's depressing for us to talk about it. It's depressing for the person and the people who are subjected to it. And there was the incident I spoke about with the Mercedes fan. There was 2 Aston Martin fans in the crowd who were getting verbally abused and verbally harassed. And again, all these 3 women that I mentioned were invited to the garages, the team they supported. And whilst that is something which will improve their day from the low it had been at, it doesn't cover up what would be a horrendous experience to go through from the original incident that's happened. So Formula 1 and the FIA really need to get their stuff together for this and provide a really strong response, because I do not want to see that at any sporting event. Like, it's just completely unacceptable.
Absolutely, I can only really echo those words, and as we say, it's not something we want to talk about, but it's good to see that first of all, the senior heads of Formula 1 are getting involved in saying something about this, but as we know, saying something about it and condemning acts that need to be condemned is one thing, doing something about it is something different entirely. And I think really we've seen throughout the season so far that, but whether it be Miami, whether it be other Grand Prix that have been held so far, Formula 1 has sort of failed really at holding safe, well-functioning events for crowds that come here, be it from the number of seats that are there, that are allocated for people, how that's all decided, safety of fans as well, as we've alluded to there, as well as a whole range of other things. And it's okay, isn't it, to go and say, well, you know, society's just getting started again after the pandemic, and I suppose there's that impact as the wheels grind after being sort of slowed down, should we say, from sort of fans and crowds perspective in terms of numbers and people being allowed to go in. But I don't think that excuse goes far enough really, because Formula 1 has long held events around the world at different circuits, long been held in different countries, and we haven't really seen, or there hasn't been the scale of them just getting it wrong. So I think really what Formula 1 need to do is not only say this is bad because it is bad, but also put in concrete changes to make sure that events can operate as they always had done before and people can be safe. Because surely for the amount of money that people have to pay around the world to go and watch this, be this in Europe, be this in the Middle East, be this in the Americas, you expect the basics to be there. So that's got to be the first thing they go after, and to make sure that that is functioning well. I mean, I do also think as well, this whole vitriol and this vile culture kind of does stem from last season. Is the blowback, is the legacy of the intense, shall we say, competition between Mercedes and Red Bull, the words that were said there, the attitude towards one another, and the clear lack of respect really from one garage to another, be that from the very top, I feel, to those who were driving for their respective teams. And of course we want competition, and of course we want, you know, there to be sort of a real fire in that competition and for it to mean something to everyone. I get that, but we've had races and competition and rivalries before that haven't resulted in this sort of weird extreme tribalism where people think it's okay to call someone else worthless because of who they support. And maybe this is systematic of society more generally, in terms of people just think it's okay to treat one another like that because of the power, social media, and the anonymity that it can give to different people, or whether it stems deeper from that really. But if Formula 1 is serious about welcoming in a whole new generation of fans, be that from fans around the world where we're holding new Grand Prix in terms of debutant countries, or the people we're welcoming in courtesy of Netflix Drive to Survive and the gate that's open really to a new generation of fans that perhaps wouldn't ordinarily be interested in Formula 1, they've got to go and make sure that they, you know, keep that gate open, let people into the sport and let them enjoy it and make it more accessible. But don't forget the very basics, and making sure that if people do want to take that step further, go to a different country, go to a circuit for the first time, that they can actually enjoy it, focus on the race, and not focus, as you said there, Tristan, with your sister, on things we presume should be God-given to us by the fact that we've paid X amount of money and we've been holding races like this for decades really. So just getting the basics right has got to be something Formula 1 does. The words are great, as I say, but putting that in place and making sure that we can have that is a whole different thing entirely. Well, it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 20 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this episode, be that on your preferred podcast provider or River Radio, be that live or via the listen back feature there. A reminder, you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review account. It's all one word, no hyphens, no underscores, just like that. Do look us up, and you can listen back to this episode and those we do post them sporadically there when it comes to our tweets. And there's no racing this upcoming weekend, but as ever we will return to discuss the sprint. There was one in Austria. We're now 2/3 down when it comes to our allotted sprinting, shall we say, in terms of F1 2022. The last one will be in Brazil, so a nice break until that one. And we'll also be looking forward as well to the next Grand Prix, that being round 12, the French Grand Prix, and we'll be no doubt discussing that and a whole range of other topics, news items and the rest that will no doubt come into fruition when the next time we speak. Until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you then.